Well, we are thankful that you've joined us for tonight. It's a special night. I just want to tell you in advance, even though we were a part of it, it was really all of God's doing. We just kind of showed up and went to work, and God did the rest of it. For those of you who don't know the story, I want to tell you a little bit of the pre-trip story before we actually add Asa and get to the trip itself. And that's important kind of on a timeline. So you saw Michaela already, but this is just me saying some thank yous before we get going. Michaela Swigert did a remarkable work on the artwork. I'll give you some of the details of that in a second. And Gary Lizzie did it. Gary, just raise your hand. I know you don't like to be pointed out. He's in the very back row where he always sits. There you go. Gary did a phenomenal amount of work in laying it out, and I'll explain that to you in a second. And Yana, a young Ukrainian bride that I married, that I did their wedding about I didn't marry her. All pastors do that at some stage in their life. I did she and Spencer's wedding probably about 12 or 14 years ago, and she doubled up and did a Ukrainian and Russian translation to put the book into print. So that's all part of the story. But to get us started, I think I thanked everyone that was a part of that, so we're grateful for your help in it. Oh, I forgot the editors. Ashlyn Margulis and my daughter, and Joel Frank did a remarkable job in editing a book on a fly in Starbucks in about 45 minutes, all right? So everything was fast, and so we're grateful for that. Just let me talk you through a few details so you might understand some of the events of how it worked out. In 2015, a book that I had done, Safe in the Storm, a book on anxiety, was picked up by a Ukrainian seminary, and they translated it into Russian. And to this day, the man who was responsible for that was a man by the name of Greg White, who is an American and chose to stay in Kiev when the war happened. And I was just interacting with him on Facebook yesterday. He literally drove the process forward where all 6 of the books I had done at that stage were translated into Russian for the Ukrainian people. Greg has chosen to stay there. He just did a pastor's conference in Ukraine for pastors who are on the front line, who wear flak jackets during the week and preach on the weekends, right? So just imagine, it's an entirely different world. In 2015, they translated that because I'd given away the copyright freely to the Ukrainian seminary for them to translate it into Russian. When the war happened in February of 2022, there was a group called the EBTC, a German seminary that I was connected with, and they just printed 5,000 copies of the Safe in the Storm book and sent it in. I didn't even know about it until they interacted with me to say, we just sent 5,000 copies in. And that prompted for us the idea, a few of us, for the idea that we might try for 25,000 copies to the refugees in Poland. Now bear in mind, the children's book isn't written yet. It hasn't even been thought about yet, okay? This is just the adult version of Safe in the Storm. And so we thought about raising funds for that, and before we could even mention it, a gentleman came up, and Asa can tell this story better than me. You want to give it a try, Asa? Okay. Asa heard it so many times on the trip that he eventually started just telling it, right? An individual came forward to me and he said, Phil, how much did you need for the books? And I said, we need $25,000. And he said, is that exact amount you need? And I said, that's the exact amount we need. And he said, you need to hear my story. He said, a number of years ago, I got involved in a bad business deal. I lost a lot of money. And the individual owes me no legal obligation, but he just wrote me apologizing and said, I can't pay you back all at once, but I'd like for this to be the first payment. And he said, I'm looking at a check for $25,000. And he said, God laid on this man's heart the desire to pay me back. And he said, every morning when I'm having my quiet time with my Bible open, this check is sitting here and I'm looking at it and I'm asking God what I'm supposed to do with it. And you said you needed a check for $25,000. I have your check, right? And this is an important part of the story for me, because what you're about to hear, I would have never had the faith to try if God hadn't taken away all of the excuses in the very first day. But how do you tell God, I don't think I can do it, I don't think I can write it, I don't think we can distribute it? You can't tell him that if he's already answered so clearly. And so that's March 31st. On April 1st, I have to show you these texts, and this is where Jason plays a part of it, because Jason serves on aboard with me with Biblical Strategies, the nonprofit side of the Biblical Strategies side. And I asked Jason to serve because he was a businessman, and I had 2 ministry guys, and I wanted a businessman. And then on the day he signed on, well, you can tell what happened, Jason.
Yes, this was our first meeting. Guys connected with us on Zoom, and I said, Phil, I have a hard stop time for this meeting. And he's like, that's fine, we'll make it, which is a miracle in itself. And we did make it. And he goes, well, what do you got to do next? And I said, well, the people that are buying our company are in the parking lot right now. So we were selling our business that day after celebrating 50 years in business. And he looked at me with his eyes wide open. And I couldn't believe it. Just the other day, he showed me this text message. So we closed on the sale of the business on March 31st. And that first text is March 31st. And then on Friday the 1st.
Can you just take a moment, Jason, and tell your faith story about losing everything and then what you did? Because that sets up.
Oh, yeah. So, well, Friday morning the 1st, technically is when the business was sold. And I went in to back up our accounting software for month end. And I started doing the backup, something I've done every month for about 20 years. Without fail, without issue, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes. It's simple. And mid-backup, it stops. It freezes. I call our software company, and they said, there's nothing we can do. You're going to have to manually enter everything in. And I'm like, this is the first day I don't own the company, and now I have to do this? I mean, it took everything in me, and it wasn't me. It was God that kept me patient, kept me calm. But an hour went by, there was no solution. So I said, okay, well, I only have one left. And I went in the back office, and I literally got on my knees, and I prayed to God, and I said, God, I need a miracle. I need a miracle specifically with my computer, if you can do it. And I texted my brother and my sister who were here, and I said, please pray for a miracle on my work computer. And about 15 minutes later, I had all my data back. And I cannot explain it other than prayer.
Okay, so that's why Jason went on the trip, because he believed in miracles, all right?
I would have been manually entering in for a long time.
He probably still would have been manually entering, and he would have missed the trip. So that's, but here's the set of texts that we were sending back and forth on that day. I texted him saying I was praying for him. He said, thank you, Phil. Next 24 hours, I'm still taking final steps of selling. Then 1 month of helping the new company with transition. I could use specific prayer that I learn how to truly depend on the strength of God instead of my own. Like, is that great? Like, and then he listed a verse there. And I texted back, always hard to walk by faith, feels so much easier, at least initially, to try to operate in the flesh. The very next day, okay, April 1st, I text him, do you have a passport? And the reason I texted him that is because the person had just donated $25,000, and what I thought was going to be a project in the fall suddenly was there were books on the printer that were coming off in Poland, the anxiety book, and so we said, we got to do this. And so I text, do you have a passport? And Jason texts back,
are we going to Poland? And we had never talked about it once.
And he just kind of read my mind, and I texted back, yes, I think we're going to Poland. So that's part of the back story of what actually happened. That's April 1st. On April 2nd, John and Dacia Abramovich are here as missionaries to Poland. And that was scheduled months earlier. I tell them, listen, we're printing some books in Poland. And John and Dacia say, really, where's your printer? And I show them the name of the printer, Arca Printer, and they said, those are personal friends of ours, and they are in our hometown in Poland, in the entire country of Poland. And just to say this, which Jason could confirm, Dacia probably was responsible for 75 to 80% of our contacts. She becomes probably the most valuable player in this whole thing. She's been a missionary here with Fellowship for 12 years, and we've never really known how many people she knew in Poland until this event. So that's April 2nd. Dacia does something else too. She tells me over lunch, where we were having lunch, she tells me about a warehouse in Warsaw, Poland that is housing it was housing 5,000 women and children. And I just could not get away from that number. I just kept thinking, I tried to imagine a warehouse with all of those cots that would have 5,000 women and children. And so on April 6th, on April 5th, rather, I go for a run. And as I'm running, I'm listening to an old Twyla Paris song. And I've asked Meredith to come and sing that because I want you to hear the words of the song and kind of know what was going on in my head. This is what I was listening to while God was saying to me, where God was convincing me that I should probably write a children's book, something I'd never done before, something I didn't know how to do. And so that's April 5th. And just before you hear the song, just know this. April 5th, I decided to write the book. Within 40 days, on the 40th day, a book that had never been thought of had now been translated, had now been illustrated, had now been laid out. Michaela will do her work, 25 pictures in 18 days. She'll paint through the night. Yana will translate it into 2 languages in 3 days. And Gary Lizzie does this masterful work of scanning in every single picture and then going back and digitally matching what's on the screen to Michaela's pictures so that it's just not a random color. It captures her work. And then he does his work in 5 days. And on the 40th day, we send a book that had not even been thought of before, but has now been edited, translated, written, and illustrated, and translated into 2 different languages. And we send that to the printer on the 40th day. This is the song that started that process.
For the young abandoned husband, left alone without a reason. For the pilgrim in the city where there is no home. For the son without a father, for his solitary mother, I have a message. He sees you, he knows you, he loves you, he loves you. Every heart that is breaking tonight is the heart of a child that he holds in his sight. And oh, how he longs to hold in his arms every heart that is breaking tonight, every heart that is breaking tonight. For the precious fallen daughter, for her devastated father, for the prodigal who's dying in a strange new way, for the child who's always hungry, for the patriot with no country, I have a message. He sees you, he knows you, he loves you, he loves you. Every heart that is breaking tonight is the heart of a child that he holds in his sight. And oh, how he longs to hold in his arms every heart that is breaking tonight, every heart that is breaking tonight, every heart that is breaking tonight.
Well, so now you know why, in the middle of that run, all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with the fact that there's children who need to hear a message. And so what happens is that's the beginning of Safe in the Stormy Ukrainian Children's Tale. And I bring that up because there's a line in the book where Nikolai asked Constantine the question, how do I know God really cares? And it's such a great question. I don't know why I've never thought about it before, but it's the perfect lead-in into the gospel. And so that's how the book came about to be written. July 2nd to the 10th is the distribution trip. And all of that seemed really fast, but now you get a chance to hear some of the really cool miracles. We don't tell you all of them tonight. Someone said we could stay here till 10 o'clock, but we'll try not to. But there's a lot of them, and you could probably tell them for a long period of time. So Jason, take a moment and interact with us about a meeting you had before you actually got on the trip.
So I had a chance to meet a missionary in Berlin who had been there for 20 years but had a lot of contacts in Poland. He was home for his daughter's wedding. So I met him at the Christiana Mall. We're talking all about the situation in Poland and with the refugees. And he calls on FaceTime a woman who runs an organization called Compassion Medical. Compassion Medical gets medical supplies to the unresourced areas, and they've been driving in vans weekly to Ukraine to supply hospitals and those caring for the wounded. And she said, hey, I am in need of a van that's going to be driving from Warsaw to Berlin. I'm driving your van from Warsaw to Berlin, so what can I do? And she said, we're in desperate need of this one particular product, and it was made by 3M. Out of college, I worked for 3M, so I just pop off, hey, maybe I can get you a pallet donated. We hang up the phone, and man, do I wish I could have taken that statement back. I'm like, why did I promise a pallet? I haven't even worked for that company for 25 years. What am I thinking? So we start praying about it. I made a few phone calls, and one phone call led to another, and a friend of ours, his wife worked for the largest medical supply company in the country. And she said, we have 6 pallets of medical supplies in our warehouse that we're willing to donate because they've been labeled wrong, packaged wrong. Maybe they came back with a tear in the cardboard box. 1 pallet turned into 6 within a couple of days, and that's when I realized, Phil had been telling all these stories. God was heavily involved in this project and had way bigger ideas than anybody can imagine. Right before the pallets were shipped, the warehouse called and said, we have 3 more pallets. So the picture you're about to see here now is the woman's daughter as they're starting to sort through 9 pallets of medical supplies that are all going to go into the eastern part of Ukraine.
And what's important is that part of the story is going to come back in a second. So just know that even before the trip started, we thought we were taking books. God had medical supplies going, but you'll hear how we come full circle to those medical pallets in just a moment. Jason goes early. Jason connects with the folks in Berlin who had set up the printing opportunity for us. They loaned us their van free of charge. We didn't have to worry. We just drove their van. Well, Jason drove their van around while I slept. They loaned us their van, and so that's why Jason was in early before Ace and I flew into Warsaw. But when Jason got there, he'd already interacted with some guys about understanding some of the situation in Poland. Jason.
Yeah, we thought we were just going for Ukraine and the refugees that were in Poland and the Czech Republic, and I could not believe how God had masterfully orchestrated sending all these workers to Poland. As I'm speaking with one of the Polish pastors, he told me about a study that I have some stats here on my phone. The study ranked every country in the world and who needed the gospel and evangelical workers the most. Pakistan was ranked 3rd on the list. Afghanistan was ranked 2nd, probably not a surprise to anyone in the room. Number 1 in the entire world for the need was Poland. And it blew my mind. And these pastors kept telling us over and over that all the people coming from Ukraine, the most evangelical country in Europe, was energizing the church in Poland. It was amazing, and it literally brought me back to Genesis 50:20. What man intends for evil, God will use for his good. He was sending the workers where they were most needed on the entire planet and energizing the church. Just listen to some of these stats. As a percentage of the population, there are 4 times less evangelical Christians living in Poland than there are in Saudi Arabia. There are nearly 1 million people per church plant in Poland. Of the nearly 2,500 counties in Poland, 2,219 have no evangelical church of any kind within its borders. And the last one, within these 2,219 white spots without evangelical churches, a total of 600 people die each day with little or no exposure to the love and the grace of the gospel. And I realized there that we were there for much more than just the Ukrainian refugees. Poland was in such need of the gospel, and God was orchestrating an awful lot in that country.
So that's what Jason got in the first 24 hours before we ever showed up. When we actually got there, this is what I call, it's Independence Day here, but I call it Dependence Day, because you're about to find out how dependent 3 Americans who only speak one language will. Asa, can you do a little bit of Polish for us?
Dzień dobry. That's about it.
That's good enough. That's great. You did better than your dad. So I think you just said thank you. Okay, so here's the point. We knew hardly any English, any Polish. We didn't know Russian. We didn't know Ukrainian. We didn't know Czech, and we didn't know Romanian. And yet the books that are in Russian and Ukrainian, we're trying to have to work through Polish people to get them into the hands of Ukrainian. We don't speak any of those languages. So just for a moment, understand how absolutely helpless we are, okay? So this is Warsaw. This is where we come into on that particular morning. Jason had set up for us to be at the Marriott. This is a shot from there. That's where we're going to start. This is how Jason meets us with a whole slew of books. How many?
About 14,000.
About 14,000 books in the back of the van, and this is how Asa looks at them, okay? Now, you just got to know, because Asa was scheduled to the heavy lifting part of this, you're going to see that expression a few more times before it's over. This is 14,000 books. Bear in mind, we are distributing 51,000 books, all right? So just the thought of it's absolutely insane. It's the most ridiculous thing a person would try to do is think he could actually get rid of all of those books, and Asa has the look of reality there, okay? So let me introduce you to our first stop. Jason says to us, we're going to make our first stop with a Russian pastor, and all I have is an address. So we go to this Polish church. You want to tell the story, Jason?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
So we show up to the church, and we're practicing how to pronounce the pastor's name, Pastor Michał Bułego. And we show up in the lobby, and there's a woman working there who has no idea that we're about to come. So we walk in, and she speaks only Polish.
And so I'm going to show you a little bit of a video clip of Jason trying to get one guy on his cell phone to talk to somebody else on his cell phone in Polish to the Russian pastor. Here we go. Just check this out. Okay, it isn't working very well, all right? What you miss, and I wish I could have videoed it, is at some stage in this conversation where he's got 2 cell phones talking to one another, the Polish secretary comes running out of the office and yells something in both phones and then goes back in her office, right? It is totally insanity. And I'm sitting there thinking, we can't even get to this pastor, let alone give him the books, right?
Correct.
And so, right about then, what happens, Jason?
So we had asked you specifically to pray for translators. And a pastor we weren't planning on meeting with shows up in the lobby who speaks English and Polish with some Russian.
And there he is. He walks in right while this cell phone chaos is going on, all right? And so he introduces us to Pastor Michał, who is there in the blue shirt. And Pastor Michał begins to talk. He's at a Russian-speaking church. He's only 100 feet away from where we were actually standing, but we couldn't even go 100 feet without God sending us a translator. All right, so that's the story. That's the first part.
And it was so unbelievably precise. If we got there 5 minutes before or after, we wouldn't have met him. If he got there 5 minutes earlier before, it wouldn't have worked. It was literally orchestrated precisely.
Pastor Michał, of course, you're trying to convince these people that these books, they can read these books, right? Like if someone walked into our church and said, hey, I got some books I want to share, I'd say, let me read them first, right? And so Pastor Michał, who spent some time in Ukraine before he began serving as a pastor here in Poland, he looks at the book, the anxiety book, this particular book, not the children's book. He looks at it and he says, I know this book. I've read this book. I read this book in Ukraine. He said, it's got a different cover. That's why I didn't recognize it. And Jason says, at this stage,
He's the author.
And the pastor says, "You're the author?" Right? And now all of a sudden the red carpet comes out and he literally says, "I got to show you my office. Come here, I'll show you my office." And he says, "Here's what we're doing for Ukrainian refugees." And he's like, he's like, I interview him, and he's like telling me all the stuff they're doing. And he gets me up to his office and he just does this. He opens it up and he says, can you sign this for me? And so suddenly he went from 400 books to, I think, 800 books. He said, "We'll take 800 books because we have a children's program that's starting with Ukrainian refugees this week. We want the children's books too." And so that was Asa's first step at heavy lifting. Dad would talk to people and Asa would carry packages, kind of thing. Here is the first young girl by the name of Victoria receiving the first children's book. Just listen. Victoria, thank you.
She's
Tell
Victoria.
her she's receiving the first book ever that we printed.
От, це ти перша, яка отримала після печаті цю книжку.
О, бачите? Дякуємо, велике
Хай Бог
And it was so great just to see her smile and hear her joy. Now, we're still helpless, okay? We are 3 American guys who couldn't get 100 feet to the person we're supposed to contact. And Asa decides he's hungry and we need to go eat. So we literally go in to a Polish cafe. We don't want to eat a lot because we're just going to eat dinner in 2 hours. We go into a Polish cafe and we're trying to order pierogies, okay? And what we end up with are 2 massive plates of food. We just want a little appetizer. We end up with 2 massive plates of food, and then out come the pierogies. And I am thinking to myself, we can't even feed ourselves in this country. And so it was just this great reminder that all of a sudden we're eating as much as we can possibly eat so we don't look rude, but that's not really what we intended. And then we do our first delivery at a warehouse, or what they call expos there. And Jason, you can maybe fill us in on this a little bit. Remember, we met Alex, and you're going to meet those guys in a moment, but Alex set this opportunity up for us, right?
Yeah, and Alex is a person who was born in Ukraine and speaks Russian, moved to America and served in churches here for a while and now finds himself in Poland. And Alex, I'm communicating pre-trip, and I'm like, "Hey, can you work 2 days with us?" And he just laughs. He goes, "Maybe I'll give you a half a day. I just don't have that time to give you 2 days." And now already day 2, he's joining up with us because he's starting to see what the book represents and that we can share the gospel. So he shows up at this expo with us, and he says, "I don't know if they're going to let us in or not, but let's see what happens." So we couldn't even get past the guard without a conversation in 2 different languages, but we eventually got there, pulled up to the front doors, and
Well, before we pulled out, we got out of the van and we prayed for an open door, okay? Because you have no assurance that you're going to get in these places. You're over there with a van full of 14,000 books, but you have no assurance that they're going to let you in. And some of them are pretty closed-minded, and you can understand why. They wouldn't necessarily let you in because anybody could come into these locations, and there was a lot of sex trafficking going on with some of the refugee children who were there, sadly. And so these places are locked up pretty tightly. And so we arrive, and I'm going to let you pick up this story, Asa. Alex and I go in and ask, and she tells us no, right? The woman behind the counter says, "You cannot come in here." We said, "We just want to give away these books." And she says, "I'm sorry, you don't have permission to be here." And so we come out, and Asa and Jason are standing outside, and we ran into these people. And Asa, you want to tell a part of this?
Yeah, so one quick detail that happened was when my dad and Alex went in there, me and Jason prayed that while we were at the van, we prayed that if they did say no, that God would just open another door for us so that way we could find some way to deliver books to these children. And so then all of a sudden they come out and they were like, "Oh yeah, they said no." And we're like, "Okay." And then these people in these yellow vests show up, and my immediate thought was like, "Oh no, we're in trouble. They're gonna like kick us out." I thought they were like security or something. But then they come up and they were actually there to share the gospel as well. The guy in the middle, he was actually from America, and he came in here like on his own little mission trip to just share the gospel with Ukrainian refugee children. And so we told them about our books, and they were like, "Oh, well, we'll just hand them out for you." So we were able to give them the books, and they were able to hand them out for us.
So our open door was an entirely different Christian group that met us walking through the door when we were walking out of the door. And they said, we'll deliver the books for you. And they took the books right up and began passing them out to children. That night, we're going to have dinner with, these are the names you'll hear repeatedly. Tomek is the gentleman on the plaid shirt. He's a Polish pastor. Alex, who you heard about, is the missionary in the opposite side there. And that's Ivanka, is Tomek's wife there next to them. These two individuals that Jason had connected with before we went become invaluable in the process. And well, we'll get to that at the end. But this is, so we're going to meet them for dinner, all right? We have a van full of books. We gave away some. And Jason, you can pick up the story here.
Yeah, so we're on our way to meet these guys for dinner, and we had been given a Google Maps link of where to park, but we were given 2 parking choices. And so we just randomly chose one. How many times have we all heard Pastor Phil talk about God wants us to pray for the big things? And Scripture also tells us to pray for the little things, even as small as a parking spot. So we had just left getting closed out, sort of a 1,000-person expo, even though, as Ace had let us know, we did get the door opened. We pull into a parking spot to go to dinner, and a car pulls up across the street from us, who is the director of a 700-person Ukrainian refugee center next to our van where we parked. We cannot make this up. Everyone starts walking to dinner this way. I'm like, wait, we got to talk to this guy. And I walked over to him and said, what's that sign on your vehicle? And he's like, oh, I run this Ukrainian refugee center. There's 700 people. Next thing you know, we're unloading books, thanks to Ace's muscles, into this Ukrainian refugee center that we had zero plan and zero knowledge of to go to.
So now we go to dinner, okay, which we've already had dinner, a lot of dinner, 2 hours earlier, because we don't know what we're doing, okay, but obviously God does know what we're doing even in where he parks us. And that night, Tomek and Ivanka walked us around Old City Warsaw. Perhaps you've heard this part of the story. Those buildings look like they're 600 or 700 years old, but they're really rebuilt after World War II. Hitler decided that he would make a scene of Warsaw, and so in the Warsaw Rebellion, he struck down Warsaw and destroyed the city. And if you Google old pictures, you will see these buildings completely blown up. And the Polish people rebuilt their city, Old City Warsaw, to look exactly like it looked prior. And it gave me an understanding that when I talk to Polish people, they say things to me like, yeah, I thank them for what they're doing for refugees. And they'll say things like, the Polish people are doing for others what no one ever did for us. Right? And so you just want to feel some of that pain and angst that was there. And that was our final night there. And July 5th is absolutely awesome, okay? So July 4th was Dependence Day, but July 5th is absolutely awesome. And it starts because we were told that we could go possibly to the warehouse that inspired the story. 5,000 women and children in a warehouse in Warsaw, Poland. And so Tomek takes us to this location. And we have to move the van no less than 5 times. We start here, we talk to someone, we move to that place, we talk to them. Tomek is always taking me in, and we're talking to these people. And they say, oh, we'll get you to somebody else, we'll get you to somebody else. And I would come out to Jason and Asa, and I would say to Jason, Jason would say, what's up? And I would say,
We haven't gotten our no yet.
okay, I said, we haven't gotten our no yet, all right? So I need some help with my faith, all right? Because we were just turned away from a warehouse the day before. And we know that an evangelistic group was turned away from this warehouse the day before. And so I'm convinced that we're probably not going to get there. But for 5 times, Jason and Asa pray. Okay? And that leads to actually Tomek introducing me to this individual, Jamal, who's in the orange vest on the left. Tomek is speaking Polish to this guy. Now, bear in mind, I haven't hardly heard any English speakers. He's speaking Polish to Jamal, and Jamal's telling him, oh, we're waiting on Katasha Katasha to actually come. And so he's saying, while we wait on the supervisor, they're talking. All of a sudden, Jamal looks at me, and with perfect English, he says to me, I speak English too. Do you have any questions? And I'm sitting there thinking, you've been talking in Polish for the last 5 minutes. Like I'm just left out here, right? And so this is important because all of a sudden Katasha comes in. And Tomek begins to talk to her, Pastor Tomek does. And he says, and she's smiling, which is a great sign, right? And he says to me, Phil, tell her about the book. And I hold up the children's book and I say, I I wrote this book for your children because I heard of this place. And I wrote a book specifically for them. And we'd love to share it if we could. Now, this stage, Jamal, who God brought me an English speaker, slides over next to me and begins to translate what Tomek is saying to Katasha, and she's saying back in my ear. Right? And she rubs her arms, and he says, she is saying she just got goosebumps, that you would come all this way to deliver a book that you have written for these children. You can do anything you want on this property all day long. And when the day is over, what books you cannot give away on your own, we will give away for you, right? And I just walk out because Jason had said to me when I said, we just haven't gotten our no yet, Jason said, maybe we haven't gotten our yes yet, right? And so I walk out and say, well, we got our yes. And so we pull the van up opposite of a food truck that a small village out of Holland mans for the last 3 months. They will send people from their village down to man this food truck for a week of their vacation. They go down there and they make all this food for free for the refugees that are there. And we throw the van doors open and we just start to pass out books for the next 6 hours, and we just sign books. And there was a woman who was hiding behind the van, and Martin, who was one of the food workers, comes over to me and says, Phil, she has been so emotionally traumatized by the war, she won't come out from behind the van, but she wants one of your books. And I walked over and I gave her the book and I pointed to my name at the top of the book, which I can't even read because it's in Ukrainian and Russian. And I pointed to the book and I pointed to myself and I said, author. And she smiled and opened up the book. I signed the book. And she came out from behind the van for a picture. At the same time, I met Alexander. Alexander was a Ukrainian soldier. He's now there. In conversation through Google Translate, he rolls up his pants leg. He shows me a hole in the side of his thigh, the size of a softball. And I look down at the phone and it says, from the war, right? And he tells me later through Google Translate, he's hoping to go back to his house that is now there's presently Russians living in his home. It's in the occupied territories over on the east side of Ukraine. That's what happens. And here's Asa passing out the books. You want to share anything here, bud?
Yeah, so this was one of the first kids that had come up when we opened the van doors. And so I gave her the book originally. And like my dad said, I pointed and said like author and then pointed at my dad. And just like they all just light up with smiles because they think he's like a celebrity. So they all want his signature in the books, and so it instead of them just thinking it's a random book, they're like, oh, I can get a signature from the author, so they wanted even more, which was great.
It was nice to feel important even though you're not, right? So that's part of that story. While I continue to pass out books, Jason and Asa began to play games. And the kids would just gather. And Asa, did I lose you, Asa? Asa did a little bit of a kicking school with the kids. We brought a football. And yeah. And then he taught them how to kick. And so we just enjoyed the day. And it was unbelievable. It was surreal to be there in that place. At the end of the day, I told Jason, I'm going to walk up around. I just want to spend some time with God and enjoy the fact that the very place that inspired the book I get a chance to be at. And as I'm walking up past the warehouse, there's a gentleman there in a wheelchair. I don't speak Ukrainian or Russian, but his feet are bandaged up and he's asking for help and I can at least push him. So I push him past one warehouse, past another warehouse, and he keeps saying further, further. And at some stage here, I'm thinking, I don't know if this is even safe for me anymore, right? Like, I don't know where this guy is taking me. And finally I push him around to a temporary military facility that's there. He thanks me and I walk back and I'm just amazed that God would let you be a part of something in helping people. Jason met this young boy by the name of
Sergey. And my wife knows that if he was not there with his mother, he would have been coming home and living with us. But such a cool kid. And the joy that he had playing soccer on a cement parking lot in flip-flops just it really made our day. Ace and I were playing football and soccer with those kids all day. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. We actually went back to that warehouse at the end of the week, and we'll show you some pictures of that shortly. From there, same day, we go to Word of Life, Poland. We have a bunch of books, still books to give away. We unload, I don't know, several thousand books in the warehouse, and then we head up to Word of Life, Poland. Tim Good is the director. Seth Haydinger is the director of their English school there, and so we meet with them, and I speak to their campers that night. And Asa helps me out with a sword fight with broomsticks because it's all we could find. And we talk about anxiety with their kids. Matthew is the translator there. And that night I give away a book to a young boy, Eddie, who's there in his gray pajamas, and his grandfather, who is Ukrainian but living in Poland with his family there, reads the Ukrainian book to Eddie. And you may remember that Nikolai gets 3 omelets the next morning, and the next morning Eddie told his dad, I want omelets for breakfast. Okay? So it actually meant he was listening to the story, which was a great thing. Okay? That particular night, there were about 15 teens, high school teens from Ukraine that were staying at the Polish camp. And I began to talk to them as they come up for a book signing. And as I talk about the seminary that I taught at that was blown up, they weep, I weep with them. You just need to understand these people that are there, while they can experience and smile, enjoy in their protection here, they know that the world that they knew is not there anymore. It's very, very different. And so you can't hardly talk to them without starting to weep with them. And Asa made a friend. Pardon me? Yep, yeah.
That girl on the left of the photo spent 4 days straight on a bus going through Russia, Belarus, to eventually get to Word of Life in Poland because she knew there was a church there and she was a believer that would take care of her. She spent $2,000 of her own money to get there. It was such an inspiring story for me to know what people were willing to go through to seek refuge and to seek it with other believers.
Yeah, great reminder. Asa made a friend too.
So this is Bodan. He is a Ukrainian high schooler, but he also went to the Polish English camp before the war had started, and then his family was kind of evacuated out of Ukraine. I forget exactly what country he told me the rest of his family was in, but he kind of grew up by himself. He didn't really have a good family at the time. His parents were his uncle and aunt, and his cousins were his siblings. He never really knew his parents, and when he was about 16, he kind of just started living on his own, and he's now 18. But he chose to go to the English camp because he wanted to learn English, and then found the Lord while he was at the English camp. But I was having a good conversation with him after my dad's message because he spoke great English, and he was talking to me, asking me if I could send him websites on where he could buy more books because he wanted to pass them out himself. And I sent him that link through Instagram. I got to communicate with him through Instagram, thankfully. And then he asked me if I could find a link where he could get an English study Bible because he wanted to be able to have a Bible that he could, or a journaling Bible. He wanted to have a Bible that he could write in. And I was I felt like that was just God clicking in my mind, oh, this is a great opportunity for you. So I immediately was oh no, don't worry about it. I'll buy you one and I will ship it to you. So that's what I did. I purchased him a journaling Bible, and my dad sent it with a guy who is going to Word of Life Poland in a few weeks. And so eventually he will get it.
Asa came back that night, and we're in the room, and he says to me, Dad, I bought something on your Amazon account. And I said, what? You bought something on my Amazon account? He said, yeah, I bought a study Bible for this guy. I said, way to go, Asa, good job, you know,
I did pay him back. I did pay you back.
Jason, yeah, you did pay me back, thank you. Jason knocked off early that night because he was worn out. Asa fell asleep shortly thereafter. And I am telling you what, I was so wired, I couldn't go to sleep until 3 a.m. I just sat and said that God would let you see this stuff. that he would let you be a part. He doesn't have to let you be a part of it, but that he would let you be a part of it.
Yeah, about that. I wake up at like 2 a.m. and just see my dad like walking circles in the room, just like all jittery and excited. And I was like, I thought something was wrong with him, but then eventually he explained to me that he was just really excited about everything. And I was like, okay.
Probably
But,
not the
yeah.
last time you thought there was something wrong with me. Jason wanted to tell you a quick story about Word of Life Poland's property.
So we were getting a tour of the campus from the director, and he told us when they originally planned to build it, they had 4 phases, and they got the approval from the local officials. They would build phase 1. Years later, they would start phase 2. So they got done phase 1, went for the CO, and the township said, no, you got to build the whole thing. Like, we can't afford to build the whole thing. This is going to take ages to do. We need to be able to use this now. And they said, absolutely not. 3 months go by. Such a great learning lesson for me because they thought they had a door closed in their face. They don't know what to do. So they need to raise $75,000 in a matter of weeks to finish what the Polish people say, we'll let you finish this part and then you can use it. In 3 weeks, they raised $150,000 and built way more than they originally planned. This was in December of 2019. Everybody knows what happened in the world in the beginning of 2020. All the churches were closed down, but because they weren't a church, they were allowed to hold services there. And they were allowed to bring in a lot more people because the building was so much bigger than they had originally planned building in phase 1. Fast forward 2 more years later, the war starts in Ukraine, a bunch of refugees filter in. They became one of the largest refugee center in the 3rd largest city in Poland because they had built such a large facility. When doors are closed or we get stonewalled, this was such a great example of God had intentions and plans that they had no idea of. Because they had to build so much more, it went to such good use over those next couple of years.
It was great. This is July 6th. This is where we talk about potential and need. If you wonder about how distribution works, at Word of Life, we met a young elder by the name of Sergey, and basically you can get it. If you don't know a person's name, just call him Sergey. There's a good chance you got him, okay? So we meet Sergey. Within a few days, Sergey takes the books and is sharing them at his church. This is a picture of him sharing Safe in the Storm with his church so that the people in the church would begin to distribute it as well. We unload some books, and Jason actually gets a chance to look at an empty van, temporarily, all right? Temporarily. And then we head to see John and Dacia Abramovich, which is a few hours away from where we were at Word of Life. John and Dacia, you may remember, are in the hometown where the printer, Arca Printer, is. We're going to meet shortly. We have dinner with them, and they take us out to a Lutheran evangelical camp where we are hoping, they have told us, to get 4,000 books into Mariupol. Now, Mariupol is in Ukraine. You may remember it's on the eastern side of Ukraine, way over there, and that's the city that was devastated during the war. The Russians took that eastern side, and they occupied Mariupol. And so this is blowing my mind that we are actually going to get books into occupied territory. But on that particular night, when we meet at that camp says we can't do that because we don't have enough funds, and there were other reasons why they weren't taking the food in, and so they weren't going to take the 4,000 books in. Here I am, disappointed again, and Jason reminds us of the need to pray. But before we get there, I think, this is Mariupol. See the before and after pictures. Absolutely devastated. 400,000 people lived in that town. Right now, 100,000 live in that town. 90% of the town has been destroyed. There is no electric, there is no water, there is no food. The only way they eat is because humanitarian aid packages are being sent into that particular location. The Russians occupy that location. And that took us to this visit that particular night, which is the hotel we're staying at. Now, I asked Ace's permission to play this for you because we stayed at the Marriott a couple days earlier, but this was the hotel in this night, and you gotta just watch this. This is a look at our hotel.
So this is our hotel room, and has a little problem with the lights. Look how terrifying this is. And the lights kind of just go on and off like that. They just start flickering. If you look down that hallway. I swear this is a haunted hotel.
Okay, Kim had told me that I wasn't allowed to let Asa go anywhere. Like she said, don't let him go exploring anywhere. So when he says to me, he says, Dad, I'm going to go explore. And I said, you can't leave the hotel. He said, okay. He's back in 3 minutes later saying, I'm not exploring here, okay? I share that with you because it wasn't really a haunted hotel, but these were our beds. And here's what I want you to know, that on this night, we hear that we thought we could get 4,000 books to Mariupol, but now we can't. And we'd been studying the book of Nehemiah because our missions committee said, listen, read the book of Nehemiah. We'd all commented each day, we'd talk about it in the van a little bit, how Nehemiah prayed. And so on these beds, we pray that God might make a way for us to get the books into Mariupol because we thought we had them, but now we don't. And Jason, you want to pick up the story there? You texted Liz.
Oh, yeah. So I texted Liz, the lady of Compassion Medical, who takes the medical supplies into Ukraine. And that's when she let me know that the 6 pallets had turned into 9. And I said, is there any way that you could get books in with those medical supplies? And she said, there's absolutely room on our vans for the books to go in with the medical supplies.
So God suddenly took 2,500 anxiety books, children and adult books, and put them on the medical pallets that are going directly into the hospital in Mariupol. Right? All because he shut a door and we prayed and he revealed the door that was open in a haunted hotel. How cool is that? July 7th, we met some really special people. This is day 4 of the trip, and these are unlikely heroes. We start that day in the Czech Republic, meeting Martin and Ilana. Martin is a pastor there at this particular church, and Ilana is a young attorney who works with the refugees. In fact, she works with something called the Refugee Center. I later discovered that's a center she started. And you know, up until now, when I talk about the books, people are pretty excited, like, that's great. And I slide the book across to Ilana. We're sitting at this picnic table outside, and she looks at the book, and she says to me, we could have used this book 10 years ago. She said, Ukrainian refugees are coming, but you have no idea how many refugees come through here. We have Syrian refugees. We have refugees out of Sudan. We have refugees coming out of Jordan. We have refugees. And she starts to list all of these countries. She's listing countries that just a few weeks earlier I had met with a missionary Christian from the Middle East, and he was listing the same countries. And I remember that when I was in Fort Worth, Texas, I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, I'm writing the children's book, and I'm thinking, there's 2.5 million Ukrainian refugees. How many refugee children are there in the world? And I Google it, right? In the middle of the night, I Google it. 36.5 million refugee children in the world. Right? And I'm realizing I'm sitting across from someone who actually understands where the refugee children come from. She would tell me later, listen, I keep my attorney's office open. There's 3 of us that work in this office, but we only do it so that we can go down into the Balkans, into previous Bosnia, so that we can meet with refugees and help them. I call these people unlikely heroes. They are people who could do something else with their skills and abilities, and they have chosen not to. Asa drops off, heavy lifting, starts to lift the books, while Jason and I are talking to people. Okay, so we were grateful for Asa in this. That day we actually go to Arca, the printer, and you get a chance to see a little bit of what we saw there, maybe.
This is the book that has been put together, but it's not half yet. So this is how it looks, and they put it here, and then it comes out ready at the other end. And this machine can do like 2,000 books in 1 hour. 2,000 per hour? Yeah. So that's why we had nothing in the morning, and now we had 2,400.
They were still printing the children's books when we got there, and they were finished putting the covers on them. Bear in mind, I asked Anusha, because we wanted to do additional printings later, I said, what's a good printing order for you guys? She said, our average order is about 3,000 to 5,000 books. And I said, we gave you an order for 51,000 books. And she said, you shut our presses down for 4 solid days. We ran your children's book. And it was such a reminder how God set up all of those arrangements, even though we had no idea what he was doing. And so we got a chance to tell her the story that Asa heard so many times he could repeat, $25,000, exactly $25,000. And we encouraged them just by being there as well. And there we had to load up another set of books. And there's Asa looking at more work to do. That's what that is. From there, we met a gentleman by the name of Peter. Jason, I'm going to let you pick up this story.
Yeah, so Peter's on my right, one of the tall guys there. And Phil and I talked after we met Peter, and we said, man, of all the people we met on the trip, if we judged one guy wrongly, book by its cover, it was Peter. You know, Peter was a gentle giant, and we first started talking with him, and it's a small church. And we're like, maybe this wasn't the right appointment. Silly me. We start understanding Peter's love of books. Peter and his father were smuggling Christian books into Poland when they were illegal, when they were under communist rule, because he knew the value of the Christian word in print and Christian books discipling people. All of a sudden, we're realizing, wow, what a great connection. We ended up giving this guy almost 10% of all the books that we printed because he had so many places he wanted to send them to. We haven't been, 2 weeks haven't been gone, he already has requested more. He was such a great appointed contact for us, and it was such a mistake on my part to judge him incorrectly in the beginning because he was so valuable to us.
Yeah, he pastored for a number of years and then had a difficult situation in a church and was out of the ministry for 12 years before he said he came back to this church that was his father's church and began to pastor there. You can also see in the picture, these are Ukrainian refugees who were staying with him there, and so they wanted to serve us lunch, and this was lunch. Of course, we should have figured this out by now. Lunch is the big meal for those people in Poland. We were having this beet soup that was pretty good, wasn't it, Asa? Yep, yeah, it was actually pretty good. And I was just saying, wow, that's great. That's about all I need to eat. And then what came out? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so next we got cutlets that were like about this, chicken cutlets that are about like the size of our faces.
They're bigger than our chickens in America.
Yeah,
Those chickens.
and I was already full from the soup, just like my dad had said, and I was like, oh, that was good. That was a good lunch. And then all of a sudden they're bringing out more food, and then we're like, okay. And we eat the cutlets, and then they bring out more food, and then they bring out more food, and then they bring out dessert, and we were like, already so full. So
It's a good thing you were doing all that heavy lifting. While we were there, Peter said, listen, we shouldn't just have the author sign the book. Let's have the author's son sign the book, okay? So Asa got his signature in a few places. You can probably read his signature better than mine. And then we're back to loading more books again, and I think you can see a bit of the volume of what we start to do. And, of course, there you go. Asa knows there's more books to lift. From there, we went up to the Czech Republic, where we visited Word of Life's property there. Hansa is the gentleman who directs that property on the left, but Adele is actually the one who set that up because she was following on Facebook and saw that we were delivering books, and she said, could we get the books? And so she reached out in an email. Jason got the email. Jason set that up. We drove clear over there. What was that, like?
4.5 hours each
4.5 hours. And then we learned something in this process, that the people were so appreciative that you came, that you brought the books. They were appreciative that you just brought them, because it's a 4.5 hour trip up there. We stay a night there too before we head back. And so Adele's to the right. Just because she sent an email, we were able to drop off all of those books at their camp. They were ministering to Ukrainian children who are coming to camp in the Czech Republic because it's not safe to hold camp in the Ukraine.
This was another appointment that I'm like, Phil, I think we might want to cut this out. It's a lot of driving for one appointment, and then we have so many more to hit. And when we got there, we found out that they have an upcoming refugee camp specifically for Ukrainian refugees. They're bringing in several hundred kids, and they had already placed a lot of refugees who had stayed with them short term in local churches. So every book that we gave them was immediately going into use. So just another small brain, let God do the thinking and just show up.
Hansa, who is the director there, I asked him, like, how did you become a Christian? He said, I came to this camp when I was 12 years old, and I became a Christian. And my father did not approve. He's a Russian Orthodox priest. And I could essentially no longer be a part of the family because I trusted Christ. And I remember we're in the hotel when he's sharing some of this and more. And, we're just 3 American guys who are saying, like, wow, what an incredible level of commitment that you potentially would know you can no longer be a part of your family just because you trust Christ as a 12-year-old. So this was Hansa, and that's Adele. From there, we got to day 5, which I've entitled July 8th, which is Remarkable Servants. When we came to this location to meet this particular pastor, this pastor, as he's walking in, says, this is a refugee dog. Okay? We walk into his apartment, and there's a parakeet. He said, that's a refugee parakeet. Okay? In a moment, you're going to hear the refugee parakeet, and you won't be saying, oh, that's nice. All right? The refugee parakeet interrupted the interview like nonstop, right? But the point is that you're going to get a chance to hear directly from a gentleman who understood what it was like to leave behind family because of his service here. This particular individual has been a pastor, has worked with refugees in the Czech Republic, but he's also been a pastor. His parents still live in Mariupol. He's about to tell you their story, and I'm going to ask if we could, I'm okay with the audio being played, but I just don't want the video on the live stream for the protection of he and his family. You're about to hear the level of commitment that some of these individuals make. And that's because there was no electric, there was no...
Yeah, it was like on December 27 or February 27, 28. There was, since that time, there was no electricity, no water. It was quite cold at that time. There was no gas, no heating, no mobile connection, anything.
And when you did hear from them, it was 2 months later, you said, 2.5 months later?
Yeah, 2 months later, I tried to connect to people who helped those residents of Mariupol, because there are some Christians rescued their lives. They were coming there with the cars and tried to take out people from the city to a safe place. So, and if like while they can come out of Mariupol, I could connect with them. So I told them if they could come and check my family, I sent them the address and so on. It was after 2 months, because during those 2 months there were severe fights in the city, bombing. Like people for 3-4 weeks couldn't even come out.
People couldn't go in or go out.
Even to the street, they could sit in the cellars and so in the basements, so they couldn't come.
You mentioned your parents are older, and that's always been their home.
Yes.
And so even if they could come out, would they come out?
Oh, I would say they would stay there.
Because that's their home.
Yeah. And after 2 months, finally I received, they found somewhere, someone gave them this SIM card with a different Russian number already, because there is a different mobile connection already. So I could call them and we could talk.
You have continued to serve here with refugees. You mentioned to me something that you tell God, you serve here, you take care of people here. And how did you say that in the end?
Yeah, I told that I take care of the refugees here and take care of my family there in Mariupol.
Wow.
And God is faithful.
And God is faithful. He was a pastor when I got there. He said, I could meet with you in my office, and he opened up the door, and his office was filled with mattresses, and Jason said later they didn't really look much like mattresses. So the parakeet and the dog are there because the people who have the dog and the parakeet are there. Just a few minutes into the conversation, he's saying, oh, I got a truck, there's a truck coming. And so we ran down and helped them unload a basement full of clothes and belongings into another refugee in another van that was going to refugees. It was such a reminder, wasn't it, Jason, that they're trying to do ministry while they're trying to do all of that humanitarian aid as well.
Yeah, we've heard from our pastors here from time to time that the Western church can be a little bit soft, and we got to experience so many servants who proved that to be clearly true. These guys just didn't feel like they were doing much over there, and they inspired us in ways that are impossible to put into words. A quick story about this guy that we just watched on video, but you need to stand up for this part of the story. You'll understand why in a second, but if everyone can stand up real quick. So I walked into the room when Phil's videoing this guy, and we got to get moving. Like, my job is to schedule, so I'm like, we got to go. Like, I'm like trying to hide behind a wall looking at Phil like this. And before I do it, I start hearing the guy's story. I'm like, whoa, I don't care how long we stay here, this guy's story is unbelievable. Now I'm just trying to sit down quietly and not disturb the parakeet that's right behind me that you heard squawking so loud. But we stopped to load clothes in this small little church in a country that doesn't have much, the amount of clothes that they collected from their church to give to the refugees was overwhelming. It just blew my mind. They probably had church members in this section here only, and they just had endless amounts of bags of clothes. So their commitment to do everything they could on top of running a church was so inspiring. But the real reason that I had you stand up is we had dinner, and it was a while ago, and you're probably a little tired. And I needed to prove to Pastor Phil that I know how to say, Fellowship Bible Church, you may be seated.
A+ work there, Jason. That's A+ work. I mentioned to you that the young attorney by the name of Alana had impacted me when she said we could have used this book 10 years ago. And so I asked John and Dacia, can we get together for lunch? And so the whole team is together. Alana comes. She's running someplace else quickly. And I ask her, she keeps talking about the Balkan Road. And I say, what is the Balkan Road? And we're having this private conversation at the end. And she gets so excited, she flips open her laptop to try to show me what's going on, spills her Coke all over. And she says, this is where the refugees come. And I felt like I was looking at a map, like a treasure map. She said, you must understand that the refugees come up through Turkey. All of these refugees they come up through Turkey. They're heading up into Europe. They stay on the country lines. You can see they're traveling on the lines in between Romania and Hungary because they keep trying to find asylum all the way up here. She said, when we're down there working with them and ministering to them, she said, there are children who are born on the Balkan Road. They're 3 or 4 years old. They have nonstop been refugees, having never had a country. They don't have birth certificates. They don't have anything because they were born as refugees. And so it's just a reminder to me that the needs are great with the refugee children. We took that load and we went to Krakow. Jason, you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is a warehouse in Krakow, the second largest city in Poland. And these people are putting together boxes, like care packages for incoming refugees. They give out 1,000 boxes a day, a little bit of food, a little bit of clothing, and they heard about the books. They're like, well, absolutely, put an adult and a children's book in every box. We'll take as many as you have. And we drove over there, had a little language barrier there as well, but God again provided with the translation that was needed from someone we totally did not expect to be there at all, knew enough English, knew enough Russian, and they have put, I think, already 8,000 in the first week, 8,000 books and boxes that went out to refugees.
So just think about this. We have no idea how we're going to do this, right? And God knows exactly how we're going to do it. And so he sends us to a warehouse in Krakow, and Jason's getting ready to do that translation thing through 2 phones again, right? And there happened to be running, this guy waving in the black shirt happens to be running a video camera, and he speaks in English. And so we explained to him what we're doing. And a special part of this is the gentleman with the gray hair sitting next to me. As he's passing out books, I hand him a book. We're unloading books together. And I shake his hand and I say, hi, I'm Phil. And he says, hi, I'm Nikolai. Right? And I said, you're in my book. Like, and I'm trying to get a children's book, and I'm saying, Asa, get me a children's book. He says, Dad, I'm busy unloading books. And so I met Nikolai on the last, one of the last unloads of the trip. And there was just a little girl who was just enjoying the pictures of the book. And that night, Jason had one more contact for us in Krakow. You want to tell us about this?
Yeah, this guy is a church pastor for a campus. Krakow has 250,000 college students in the city. So he was ministering to just one of those universities there, but they also had 7 churches in Ukraine that they had constant contact with. This guy moved that day, moved his wife and young children to a new place. His wife had surgery scheduled 2 days later. This is, 10:30 at night. He's completely wiped out, but he said, yeah, I want to get these books into the Ukrainian refugees' hand, and he drove over to our hotel to meet us. Again, just another inspiring moment of how much he was willing to do and go to serve the refugees there.
Yeah, I was able to make a contact through my son-in-law with a couple of English-speaking folks there too. We're having to mail them books because we couldn't get books to them that night because they were out of town, but there were just contacts everywhere. You just used the contacts that you had, and God opened up doors. Day 7 is, I've entitled Suffering, because we'd unloaded nearly all of our books, and we're in Krakow. And so we talked about it that night, and we said, what if we visited Auschwitz the next day? So you're going to recognize this as the death gate at the death camp at Auschwitz. There are over 1 million Jews and Poles that will come through these gates. Some 900,000 will go directly to the gas chambers when they step off the train here. And in fact, this is the location after they come through the death gate. You can kind of see the prison camp, what's left of it behind. But this is where 900,000 individuals will step off the train. They'll pull the strongest ones, basically, to make them slaves, and everybody else they'll send into the woods. Unbeknownst to them, they strip them in the woods so that they're out of their clothes. They say, we're sending you to the showers, but they're not really the showers, they're the gas chambers. And 900,000 Jewish people will be executed over the course of those 2 years that this particular prison camp is open. They came in these trains, train cars. You may have seen videos of them. This is the real thing here. And I've just asked Jason and Asa to maybe share any of their thoughts that they might have from the time there.
Yeah, this is the picture I asked Phil to put up, and we walked around there. We did 15,000 steps before 11 a.m., and we didn't talk much. There wasn't a lot to say. But I remember Phil making the comment at one point. He said, I just can't believe how evil we can be to each other. And it just started to hit me that this is the reason to share the gospel. Because when the gospel is not part of someone's life, this is what we're all capable of. Our hearts are evil. And if we don't share the gospel, if we don't follow what Christ told us to do, capable of this. And it was a very weighty moment for me to realize how many opportunities I've let slip. This is why we should be doing it.
You're looking at the barracks that were meant to hold 20 horses, but they ended up holding 400 people. And they continue to place people in these barracks, and they would just basically, as far as your eye could see, you could see the foundations of these particular barracks. There was an area in the back called the sauna, which is where they would totally take away an individual's identity. If you weren't executed in the gas chambers, you were kept because they thought you could work in the factories, or they chose to experiment on your body. They would bring you into what they call the sauna. They would strip you down. They would walk you through the showers, men and women. They would mock you. They would laugh at you. They would shave your head so that in the end, you would be recognized if you could ever escape the camp. Though of the 1 million people that stayed there, only 20 people ever escaped because it was so hard to escape. And if you could get out, everybody would recognize you. And at that stage, they would take away your name and they would put a number as a tattoo on your wrist, and you would no longer have the identity you had. ACU commented that in the sauna they had captured these pictures, and you had some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so these pictures are basically the refugee or the Jewish refugees. They're like all their personal items that they had on them when they stripped them down and took all their belongings from them. And it kind of just shows all the families that were executed and killed. And probably the saddest part about it is when you go on the other side of this wall, there's like 3 more walls with more pictures. And there's a whole section that's just children. And it just shows all these like newborn babies and toddlers that were just all executed with the other Jewish refugees. And it was just really sad to see because, yeah.
It was a reminder that what we were doing was valuable. It was an encouragement to people to share books that would share the gospel was important. We went back the next day. We went back to the warehouse just because we knew we were going to load up some more books for Jason to take back up to Germany. And we just wanted to do one more day here. And we realized that we kept the soccer and footballs and we wanted to give them back, right? So we wanted to get rid of them before we brought them. So this is Asa.
Yeah, so when we came back, there was a like whole new group of kids that were there, like a bunch of new people that had been bussed in.
Refugee Center is a relocation center, so refugees come in and refugees go out. And in 5 days, there were actually new.
Yeah, there was just a whole new group there. So this kid here, he wasn't there when we were first there, but he was out there playing soccer, and so they don't really have American football in their countries. So none of them really knew how to throw a football. So I basically taught them how to throw a football, and they all just loved it. They thought it was so much fun. And so this kid here was the one that I just saw that like loved it the most and just loved throwing the football while everybody else was playing soccer. He just wanted to keep on throwing the football with me. So I just, as much as I could translate with hand motions, I gave it to him, and then he would try to give it back to me, and I was like, no, keep it. And eventually he understood, and a bunch of other guys came out, and he like pointed at me, and he was like, oh, he gave this to me, and then they all just started playing. So it was just really cool to watch that, like, and that isn't the nicest football in the world either. So you can see it's a little torn up, but it's awesome to see how like happy and excited they were just for something that small.
And then we happened to run into Sergey one last time. So when we ran into Sergey one last time, we don't have a translator, so Jason is texting. You want to pick up this story, Asa?
Oh, yeah. So
They're working through Google Translate.
Yeah, so Jason's working through Google Translate with Sergey. And Sergey has his phone, or his mother's phone, that he uses Google Translate for too. And he was using Google Translate, and his first words were, "You're back," with like an exclamation point, like, "I'm so happy that you're back." And Jason was like, "Oh, yeah. And then explained to him that we were back. And then he was like, "But you guys look like you're leaving," because it was when we were packing up and we were about to leave again. And he was like, "Are you guys leaving again?" And Jason was like, "Yes." And then he said, "When are you guys coming back?" And
Which Asa immediately turned to me and goes, "How are you going to answer that one?"
yeah, I looked at him and I was like, man, I don't know how you're going to answer that. And Jason like immediately was like, oh no. And because it was our last day passing out books, and I was just like, wow, that's because he had the biggest smile on his face when we were back. And as soon as we got back in the van, I was like, Jason, I know you want to steal that kid so badly. But yeah, it was.
That day was such a reminder when we got to the expo. We just wanted to go and see the kids one more time, see the place that inspired the book. And Phil and I both had the same thought. We're like, man, maybe this was a mistake. What are we doing here? Nothing was going on. We couldn't generate anything. And a couple minutes later, one of the food truck people from Holland walks up to Phil and says, hey, I'm a reporter. It's not a big paper, but I do a newspaper back in my town. I'd love to interview you for a story there. So now the story is going to spread again. Just mushroom cloud out. And I'm looking at that happening, and I'm like, forgot to pray again. God, it's simple, but can you just please send us some kids to play with? We would just love to play soccer and football with these kids one more time. It was not 15 seconds later, there's a kid banging me on the leg, like, play, let's go. And we were playing soccer and football again, and it was just a reminder that bring our needs to the Lord first. We can't make it happen on our own.
That was Saturday. We were back to load up some more books for one more distribution, and there you go. I was just looking at the books again. This is the final day, and one of the things Jason and I began to say when we were there is that America often feels like we have to play defense. Our nation is struggling. You say something, you take a position on something, and you're immediately defensive. You have to answer that. You have someone else criticizes you, you have to answer that. I said, like, we were playing offense nonstop because there was such a desire and a need for the gospel and for the books. And though we couldn't speak the language, the book shared the gospel, and we could give the book, and they would take the book. And it was so much fun. I said to Jason, just feeling like we're playing offense all day long. Jason told me the story about playing basketball when he was a kid. And he said, you know, he would come in on the rec team after the starters had played, and he said, you know, we'd kind of chuck some balls at the backboard, and he said, but if we ever hit one, he said, like the crowd would erupt, right? And he said, Phil, it feels like everything we throw at the basket here goes in. And it was just such a great reminder why, as a church, you have to keep your focus on what's going on in the rest of the world. Again, there are millions and millions of people. Paul said to me this morning, when he was talking about what's going on in Nairobi, he said, I'm almost tripping over the fruit in Kenya. It's just falling off the trees. And again, I'm all for the fact that we should pray for our country and support efforts here. But I just want to remind you, there's only 325 million people that live in this country. There are literally billions of people that are elsewhere, many of whom are just waiting for us to share the gospel with them. So I would just encourage you, you want to learn to play offense. God has this wonderful way of saying, listen, I just want to show you I can do whatever I want to do. Sunday I'm supposed to preach at Tomek's church. This is Tomek, and you may remember him from before. He was instrumental in our being there, so I'm preaching, he's translating. But when I get there, there's another individual by the name of Yannick, and Yannick meets me, and he says, Phil, when did you go to Master's Seminary? I said, 1991 was when I graduated. He said, that's when I went, and that's when I graduated. Can you find yourself in our graduation picture? Okay. And he is the pastor who founded the church that Tomek is preaching at in Poland. And so I didn't know that I knew him. For one moment, I thought I missed a graduation picture. I couldn't find myself because I looked so young. Asa found me. And so there I am pointing to myself, and Yannick's pointing to himself. And I thought, only God does this stuff, right? Like only God says, I've shown you all of these precise moments, and I'm going to show you one more just because it's funny, right? I'm going to put you in the same church with a guy who is the only other guy besides Tomek who serves in Poland, the only other Polish man who graduated from Master's Seminary. So there I am catching up with an old classmate after all those years. I preached with Tomek there, and then we went to his home for lunch. And I just want to say, if I can, we're almost done, but I just want to brag on Jason for a moment. I am there because my heart is torn for the refugee children. But Jason had a heart that was concerned for those who were faithfully serving and how weary they were. And so over lunch, he says, I don't want to miss an opportunity to talk to Tomek and ask how we can help him. And so Jason, I'll let you kind of pick that up. That's what this conversation is about.
So we were supposed to see Tomek for a couple hours as well during our entire trip. This is probably our 5th or 6th day with Tomek. When Tomek got us into that expo that Phil told about earlier, he spent a few hours with us that morning. We were never supposed to see him that day because he was too busy. And right before he left, he said, I'm sorry, guys, I have to go. Like he felt like he was letting us down. And the reason he had to leave is he had to find an available pediatrician that day to verify that his 7-year-old son had a fever, and his surgery that they had scheduled for the next day for months had to be put on hold because of the fever that his son had. I'm like, you've just spent hours here with us and this is what you have to do? He's like, yeah, pediatricians are really hard to find at the last minute. It just blew our mind of the service and the level of care he was willing to give us when he had so much on his plate.
And the reason he had to find a pediatrician was because in Poland, if he didn't have a doctor's order that said his son had a fever, he would have to pay for the surgery completely out of pocket on his own, even though his son couldn't have the surgery because of the fever. So just imagine momentarily, it just isn't the challenge of the child, it's the challenge of the financial loss, but he's walking by faith looking for a pediatrician.
So he had given us time and time again and invites us to lunch at his house after the service. So the 3 of us go there with his wife and his son. They cook for us, they're hosting us. And we ask him, what can we do for you? How can we continue to support you? This isn't the end. This is the beginning of our relationship. And he tells us of a few needs. The evangelical pastors that we met there, they all knew each other. We were 7 hours away from the other church. They said, there's not many of us. We know who we are. And his church, Tomek's church, has moved 4 times in the last 2 years due to growth. And because of that, they can't afford a building. They're still a young church. The average salary in Poland is 800 euros a month. A euro and a dollar are almost the same thing. So their giving amount is low, with them constantly on the move, improving and doing enhancements into the building they rent. They just don't have the funds to purchase a building that will allow them for growth. To put that into perspective, how old is this building now?
3 or 4. Oh, this building?
Yeah.
This building's 21 years old, I think.
And we still have room for growth. They can't even allow 6 months for growth. They had to meet in tents in a forest for a little while they were waiting to find their next location, because the positive is the Christian church there is growing. The gospel is spreading there. People are hungry for it. And I want to continue to support this church. If there is anyone who has felt tugged on their heart tonight that you want to support a church like this in a country that is so desperately in need for the gospel, talk to me about it. I'll be happy to tell you ways that you can participate. They need laborers. They need finances. We would love to help them buy a building that they could then use for several years and not have to have that on their plate. We wouldn't have been able to accomplish near half as much as we did without Tomek. He was so instrumental, so giving, and Phil and I were like, if there's a guy to lead the church in Poland, he's it.
Yeah, it was very fascinating. When we went to dinner with them, Tomek prays, and Jason and I said the same thing afterwards, like he prayed, okay? Like it's just food, and it's a lot of food again, but he prayed, and it was like this deep, meaningful theological prayer. It had the cross in it. It just had everything in it. It had your growth in Christ in it. It was like, and so I say to Tomek, Yannick mentioned you have some health concerns. He said, I struggle with migraines. Sometimes they take me out for 3 days in a row. He said, in fact, I just cling to the toilet and throw up in the toilet for 24 hours and pray, right? And then he says, but I wouldn't trade that because that's caused me to be dependent on the Lord, right? And I'm sitting there thinking this is so different than how you and I live and trying to find comfort. Here is a man who is in deep pain regularly and yet sees it as an opportunity to grow dependent on the Lord. So that was Tomek. We spent so much time with Tomek. We were supposed to meet Alex at the Russian-speaking church one last time. And let's see, we were supposed to meet at this church. And so finally we say, we got to go. And this is a Russian-speaking church. Alex isn't a pastor. He is a missionary there, but he's going to set us up to talk to Ukrainians and drop off books. And Jason has told him we're going to miss the service, but we might be there at the end. So you want to pick this story up? We're almost done with the night.
Yeah, we promise we're almost done. So we're driving to this church, and I don't know if I called my wife by mistake or she called me by mistake. The phone rang. We put her on speaker. The 3 of us are talking. It was nice to hear her voice, and we're just sharing some stories. And all of a sudden, I realized, I don't know where I'm going. Honey, I got to hang up. We need the GPS. We hit the button on the phone, and literally the turn we needed to get off at the exit was about 100 yards away. We pull over to the right, get off at the exit. We pull into this church when they're singing the last song.
The last verse of the last song. And they have told them that a guy's coming to give books away and he's about to sign them. And I get out of the van and Alex grabs my jacket and he says, come with me. All I need is you. I got to get you to the front. And Asa and Jason start to bring in books and they're singing the last song. And if you've ever heard Russian-speaking people or Slavic people sing, like they sing with gusto. And so they're belting it out. And he's walking up and he says to me, I just told my wife when I saw that van pull in with 90 seconds to spare, this man must walk with God. Right? And I said, I don't know. I think my driver walks with God, okay? So in we came, and then they just started coming forward for the books, and we signed, and we met people, and we gave books out to children. And then we're heading back.
Extremely quick sidebar. That morning, we went back to load up the last books, and we thought we only had adult books. And we found 3 boxes of children's books. And I knew it was going to happen. Phil was a little disappointed. Like, we didn't distribute all the children's books. Why do we still have 3 boxes left?
You guys
Sure
are getting a
enough.
good look at my lack of faith and Jason's
No.
strength of faith, but that's kind of how it works.
God knew exactly what was planned. He knew we were going to see children at Tomek's church. He knew we were going to see children at Alex's church. We didn't have those planned. God had it planned.
We were nearly done because we're heading back to the hotel. There is a hotel that keeps all of these individuals, the refugees that are coming out. Asa's enjoyed writing on the books in the back. But I want to point out to you these 3 young women who are Ukrainian refugees. The young woman with the blonde hair on the left is a Ukrainian refugee. She has an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old child. Just for a moment, think about this. You're that young, you're a mom, you leave your country, and you come to this hotel, which is where you stay. Just real quickly, tell us the story about the hotel.
Yeah, this is called Hotel Felix, and there's about 60 rooms that are housing refugees. There is a realtor, travel agency in Nebraska who said, we want to do something to support refugees. They said, we'll pay for 60 rooms for a month. Another donor said, we will donate the money for food for the people in those rooms. The cost of the food for 1 month is $50,000. And every month, other donors have come forward and said, we'll pay for the rooms for a month. Another donor will pay for food for the month. They are paid for the next couple months. The government is finally starting to get involved because they're seeing how much love Christians like Alex and his church are pouring out on the refugees that are staying at this hotel.
And there we spent the night, Jason doing the same thing, asking Alex how we can help him. So I was just so encouraged to hear Jason reach out both to Alex and Tomek. And then when we thought it was over, it wasn't quite over. Because at the airport, Jason texts me one more picture and says, I had a few books left and I just ran into people from Samaritan's Purse and the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association and I gave them some more books, okay? And so even when we thought it was over, it wasn't quite over. That's the trip. You have been gracious in letting us share lots of stories. We didn't share all of them, but we shared enough that hopefully you can see that God receives the glory for everything that happened. We are on the next adventure, which is to raise another $25,000 for another 25,000 books. That would be the second printing, 15,000 children's books and 10,000 adult books on anxiety in the language to go back into some of these distribution locations that we have, some of which have already been depleted. Our children at VBS purchased for us with $3,008, 3,008 books. And so we're really grateful for that. But if you would like to participate in that, there's offering boxes on your way out tonight. And you can also pick up that little card that allows you to give online. One final thing, in case somebody else is listening and sending you emails asking for gift cards from me for Ukraine, okay? That's not me, all right? So I don't do gift cards. That's the guy who keeps trying to use my name. I don't do gift cards, but if you'd like to give through the website that's on the card, or you can put checks or cash in the boxes going out. The checks should be made out to Advancing Biblical Strategies. That's the nonprofit side of Biblical Strategies. The one thing we didn't do tonight was we wanted to pray for the books that are in the hands of people. So I'm just going to ask maybe a couple of you could stand up and do that, and then we'll wrap up the night together. So just feel, if God's laid on your heart to pray, just pray good and loud for us. God can hear you, but maybe we can't, all right? And just ask that God would put the books in the hands of the people that need them. Great and awesome God. To you be the glory. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you, folks. Thanks for coming. If you have questions, we'd be glad to answer them.